This is the World Organic News for the week ending 4th of March 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. We begin this week with a piece from Business Insider entitled Cows Are Getting a Bad Rap and It's Time to Set the Record Straight. Giving Up Meat Won't Save the Planet. By Frank M. Mittelhoner. Quote, as the scales and impacts of climate change become increasingly alarming, meat is a popular target for action. Advocates urge the public to eat less meat to save the environment. Some activists have called for taxing meat to reduce consumption of it. A key claim underlying these arguments holds that globally, meat production generates more greenhouse gases than the entire transport sector. However, this claim is demonstrably wrong, as I will show. And its persistence has led to false assumptions about the linkage between meat and climate change, end quote. I've been suggesting that this is a false link for years, and that this is part of the nonsense spread by the likes of George Monbiot and others, who really have no understanding of agriculture other than the CAFOs discussed in the previous episode. It gets worse, as we'll see in an upcoming quote. The question I have, and which I apply to all these sorts of conundra, is who benefits? Clearly, ending animal agriculture is a vegan agenda. The Facebook page, Irish Regenerative Land Trust, shared a pic from Vegan Australia. Pic is in the show notes, but I will quote. You may have heard the term regenerative grazing, which has appeared in the media lately. Its promotion may indicate the animal agriculture industry has increased its PR efforts in response to extensive criticism of the sector's devastating environmental record, end quote. Leaving aside the incorrect use of an apostrophe, but that's a personal thing. The extensive use of pesticides, herbicides and the clearing of the Amazon for soybean agriculture to build tofu is apparently okay, but I digress. I think we can agree that the CAFO system is an environmental disaster, but going vegan isn't the answer. Another point from this quote is the use of the term animal agriculture. This Henry Ford industrial approach to agriculture is where the current situation arose. Separating animals from plants in the production process has led to things taken to their logical conclusion, with individuals describing themselves as hog farmers, wool producers and so on, rather than farmers. While these things may be the main economic stream in an enterprise, the really good ones have an integrated mix of plant and animal production systems. Indeed, I would argue they can't actually be separated but are parts of the whole system. I would refer you to John Seymour's complete book of self-sufficiency. There's a link in the show notes. In particular, his intro section on the webs of nature and their replication in an agricultural setting. They were seminal in my understanding as a 16-year-old. But back to the original piece. Quote, a healthy portion of meat's bad rap centres on the assertion that livestock is the largest source of greenhouse gases worldwide. For example, a 2009 analysis published by the Washington, D.C.-based WorldWatch Institute asserts that 51% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from rearing and processing livestock. Yet, according to the US Environmental Protection Agency, the largest source of US greenhouse gas emissions in 2016 were electricity production, 28% of total emissions, transportation, 28%, and industry, 22%. All of agriculture accounted for a total of 9%. All of animal agriculture contributes less than half this amount, representing just 3.9% of total US greenhouse gas emissions. That's very different from claiming livestock represents as much or more than transportation, end quote. Again, who benefits? I'm not sure exactly, but not the planet, nor the people living on it, nor the biosphere. In the same way one published article has led to antibiotics being routinely added to CAFO feeds, yet the results have never been replicated, so too do we have this meat equals greenhouse gases belief. Further from the article, quote, I pointed out this flaw during a speech to fellow scientists in San Francisco on March 22, 2010, which led to a flood of media coverage. To its credit, the FAO, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, immediately owned up to its error. Unfortunately, the agency's initial claim that livestock was responsible for the lion's share of world greenhouse gas emissions had already received wide coverage. To this day, we are struggling to unring the bell, end quote. Indeed, it is very difficult to unring a bell. Paradigms can be shifted, but it takes more than evidence, it would appear. As the effects of climate change start to impact in more obvious ways, the future becomes a matter of more thoughtful discussion. From the piece, The Future of Farming in an Era of Climate Change, written by Michael Hambritt of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, quote, "These are 4 headlines we've had in the last 12 months. A 7-year drought concluding in a once-in-40-year flood, bushfires in normally moist Tasmanian wilderness, mass fish deaths and river system in peril. The entire state of New South Wales is currently in drought. It has sparked concerns among people like Nigel Gibson, who, like many others, have increasingly taken steps in their own suburban lives to prepare for the impacts of climate change. But recent weather events have left Mr. Gibson wondering if enough is being done for agricultural communities on a broader scale. Will farmers need to move, or can they transition to other opportunities?" he asked ABC Central West New South Wales Curious Project. "I feel this is something no one is talking about." End quote. There is in fact some discussion going on around this subject, but nowhere near enough. We need to look at a little history. The conservative side of politics in Australia has swallowed the Kool-Aid on the idea of laissez-faire economics, as it is applied to agriculture. This apparently does not extend to mining companies who can contribute to party finances, but that's another episode. Combine this with the notion that the Bush votes to the right of centre and the major left-of-centre party, the Labor Party, can see no need to support farmers except in times of emergency. And this is a bipartisan position. No subsidies, money after floods, fires and during droughts. Subsidies, though, do extend to solar panel installation and include feedback tariffs above and beyond wholesale prices. So payments to encourage behaviour change are a thing. Farming in the face of climate change adds another variable to the challenges of growing food. The lunacy of ignoring the agricultural sector until the ship hits the sand is almost beyond belief. There are reasons, though. By not subsidising agriculture, Australia can point to the US and the EU and say they are creating an uneven playing field. The US and the EU don't care. So given that the laissez-faire approach to one sector of the economy, agriculture, doesn't make any logical sense, and that the Australian government, state and Commonwealth, while not happy to do so, realise the political dangers of not providing support after natural disasters, a slight change in emphasis could have the same funds poured into regenerative agricultural education. The same system which created rust-free wheat varieties, developed Packham pears and defeated the prickly pear infestations of the 1930s could be used as it is trusted by those on the ground. They would have to admit their errors with regard to chemical-based food production and explain why there is a need to move to regenerative agriculture, but they are those best placed to do so. At present, 1 farmer per district seems to be the limit for this change. No one wants to be the person to do things differently in case it fails, apart from the one maverick. This is especially so when farmers are under debt pressures. Once that one farmer does succeed, then for others to change would mean admitting they were wrong, even in the depths of a drought, with regenerative farms agreeing to their boundary fences, and there's dust on the other side. People are resistant to change. So the CSIRO, Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, the ag colleges, the rural science departments, the horticulture schools and the ag courses in high school can make the difference. If we toss in some funding to cover the transition period and call it land management payments rather than agricultural subsidy, I think we have a model that would work. In the US and the EU and other places where subsidies already exist, tweaking the system to fund regenerative but not factory farming models in, say, 3 to 5 year transition period, and we would be sucking carbon out of the air and putting it into the soil and repairing our food webs and the wild ones too. My thinking would be to pull funding from organic farms which simply follow the chemical industrial model but don't use chemicals. I've seen such registered enterprises using mini flamethrowers against weeds and as a consequence the soil and the life below it. I know it seems almost unbelievable, but there you go. So cows aren't destroying the atmosphere. We can get carbon back in the soil and do it through the people who are at the coalface. Lol. no pun intended, and experiencing the effects of climate change directly. They have the local knowledge, they have the financial incentives, and we need this to happen. And on that note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. The podcasting checklist is still available over at John Moore Podcasting Services if you're thinking about starting your own podcast. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.